There are thousands of clay tablets that have been waiting in the sands of Mesopotamia for 6,000 years to be deciphered, holding evidence of our origin. The Sumerians, this civilization that sprang out of nowhere, already complete and sophisticated, left behind complex technical records, administrative documents, chronological lists of royalty, and reports on Sumerian life. While the rest of humanity was still hunting with stones, the people of Sumer were already calculating planetary orbits with astonishing accuracy, developing complete writing systems, creating codes of law, and building cities with irrigation systems that would be the envy of many modern metropolises. No culture should be born fully formed, already complete and sophisticated. Mainstream archaeology gets lost in theories about accelerated development, isolated geniuses, or extraordinary coincidences. But the Sumerians themselves had a much simpler and more direct explanation. They stated repeatedly, insistently, in every document they produced, "We were taught by the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came down." Modern academia has classified these accounts as mythology, a convenient decision to ignore the inexplicable. But myths are vague. Historical records have dates and names, and this difference can be measured, quantified, and analyzed objectively. To resolve this, we use the axiom, an analytical intelligence system we developed and trained, designed specifically for the linguistic and structural analysis of ancient texts, free from prejudice, academic fears, or religious dogmas. The axiom was given a seemingly simple task: to analyze the narrative structure of tens of thousands of Sumerian and Akkadian tablets, comparing them with two control groups. The first group contained recognized myths, such as the adventures of Zeus, the metamorphoses of Ra, and the battles of Thor. The second group comprised verified historical chronicles, like the records of Herodotus, the Roman annals of Tacitus, and the military campaigns of Caesar. The system did not judge whether the described events were possible or impossible. It only analyzed the textual structure, the density of factual information, the presence of temporal markers, and the specificity of the data presented. The results contradict centuries of academic consensus. The Sumerian writings about the Anunnaki showed an 87% structural correlation with historical documents and only a 13% similarity with mythological texts. These numbers are clear. The authors of those tablets were not creating poetic allegories about the sun and the moon. They were documenting real events with the same bureaucratic methodology they used to record harvests and commercial transactions. The axiom isolated three patterns that separate these reports from traditional mythology. The first was extreme technical specificity. The precision of the texts is surgical, detailing that 600 Anunnaki operated on the Earth's surface, while 300 remained in orbital stations. They name each mission commander, each operational base, and each specific objective. They mention council meetings, administrative disputes, and logistical problems. What mythology would concern itself with divine bureaucracy? Furthermore, an obsessive chronology was noted. The Sumerians maintained dynastic lists that stretched over hundreds of thousands of years, always correlating terrestrial events with specific celestial positions, with the movement of a planet they called Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. Every important event was dated not only in terrestrial years but in shahs, cycles of 3,600 years that corresponded, according to them, to a single orbit of Nibiru around the sun. And the most revealing point was the absolutely neutral tone of the records. The Anunnaki were portrayed with flaws, ambitions, and internal conflicts. There were power struggles between Enki, the Lord of Earth and chief scientist, and his half-brother Enlil, the military commander of the operation. There were labor problems, strikes, and even sexual scandals. The chronicles read like corporate reports from an interplanetary mining operation. And what is truly frightening is the naturalness with which they describe impossible things. With astronomical knowledge we would only confirm millennia later. Procedures we now recognize as genetic engineering, flight technologies, instant communication, and weapons of mass destruction. Either the ancient Mesopotamians were the greatest science fiction writers in history, anticipating Jules Verne by 5,000 years, or they were simply transcribing what they saw and heard. It becomes hard to escape the obvious. We have always had company. and our true history has been deliberately buried under layers of religious reinterpretation and academic skepticism. But the data does not lie. The evidence is all there, written on baked clay, just waiting for us to have the courage to read it literally. The Sumerians drew a map of the solar system they should not have possessed. There is nothing poetic or vague here. What we have is a level of technical detail that would take humanity another 5,000 years to achieve again. Even stranger is not just what they knew, but how they recorded this knowledge with the same casualness with which they documented the amount of barley in their storehouses. In the Berlin State Museum, under catalogue number VA 243, rests a small stone cylinder that should be impossible. Dated to 4,500 years ago, this Akkadian seal depicts a seemingly ritualistic scene, but in the upper left corner, almost like a casual note, is our solar system etched in stone. The sun at the center, surrounded by 11 celestial bodies, exactly as we know them today. Mercury, Venus, Earth with its moon, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then the impossible: Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. William Herschel would only discover Uranus in 1781. Neptune would remain invisible until 1846. Pluto would only be detected in 1930. How can this anticipation of millennia be explained? The axiom calculated the probability of random coincidence in this representation. The result was less than 1/1000th of 1%. Statistically, it is more likely to win the lottery 10 times in a row than for the Sumerians to have gotten it right by chance. They knew and described these planets with characteristics we have only confirmed with space telescopes. They called Uranus the bright, greenish one. Neptune was the blue-green, watery planet. They described Saturn's rings as a luminous belt around the god. They knew that Jupiter emits more radiation than it receives from the sun, something we only detected with modern instruments. They mentioned the moons of Mars, invisible without advanced optical equipment. All this astronomical detail converged on a single focal point in their cosmology, which was a 12th member of the solar system they called Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. It was a specific world with a defined orbit, detailed physical characteristics, and most importantly, it was inhabited. According to the clay records, Nibiru travels an extremely elongated elliptical orbit that takes 3,600 Earth years to complete. For most of this period, the planet journeys through the frozen depths beyond Pluto, but once every share, as they called this great cycle, Nibiru plunges into the inner solar system, crossing between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. The axiom processed all the astronomical data from the Sumerian archives, particularly the creation epic Enuma Elish, and built an orbital model. The result was remarkable for its coherence. The proposed orbit was not only mathematically viable, but it also explained several anomalies in our solar system that modern science still debates. The Enuma Elish describes what they called the celestial battle. Nibiru, in one of its primordial passages, allegedly collided with an ancient planet named Tiamat, which orbited where the asteroid belt is today. The description avoids the mythical language of warring gods, preferring terms that the axiom identified as descriptive of orbital mechanics and planetary impact. According to the account, Tiamat was split in two. One half was thrown into a new orbit, becoming the Earth. The other was shattered, creating the asteroid belt, which the Sumerians called the Hammered Bracelet. Tiamat's largest satellite, Kingu, was captured by the gravity of the new Earth, becoming our moon, which is abnormally large for a planet of our size. This collision narrative coherently explains several peculiarities of the solar system. The tilted axis of Uranus, as if it had been struck by something massive, the retrograde rotation of Venus, the eccentric orbit of Pluto, the asteroid belt itself, which should be a planet according to the laws of planetary formation. The anomalous composition of the moon, which did not form with the Earth, nor was it captured intact, but appears to be a fragment of something larger. The astronomers of that civilization were merely transmitting information received from those who had witnessed these events or had records of them. The Anunnaki, inhabitants of Nibiru, knew the history of the solar system because their own civilization was old enough to preserve these memories. Every astronomical detail in the Sumerian documents always pointed to the same place. This knowledge was taught by visitors who came from a world whose very existence challenges our conventional astronomical models, a world that returns periodically, following the immutable laws of gravity and angular momentum. And if the Sumerians were right about astronomy, if every detail about distant planets proved to be true, why would we doubt them when they tell us exactly who the Anunnaki were and why they came to Earth? The motivation of the Anunnaki was not conquest or curiosity. What brought them was desperation, a desperation so profound that it forced them to cross billions of kilometers of empty space in search of a single element: gold. For us, the yellow metal has always been synonymous with wealth and power. We adorn our bodies with it. We hoard bars in vaults. We have killed for it through the centuries. But for a civilization facing planetary extinction, gold had an infinitely more crucial value. It was the difference between surviving and watching their world slowly die. The Axiom processed all the data on Nibiru extracted from Sumerian reports, such as its estimated mass, its 3,600-year eccentric orbit, and its likely atmospheric composition. The system modeled the fundamental problem a civilization would face on such a planet. The conclusion was direct. For most of its orbit, Nibiru traveled through the frozen darkness of deep space, far from the sun's warmth. When it approached the sun, extreme radiation bombarded the planet. This relentless cycle was destroying Nibiru's atmosphere, molecule by molecule, blowing it into the void. The solution the Axiom identified seems like science fiction, but it is scientifically plausible. Microscopic gold particles dispersed in the stratosphere would create a perfect reflective shield. Gold does not oxidize, does not react chemically with other atmospheric elements, and its unique radiation-reflecting properties make it ideal for this purpose. It was geoengineering technology on a planetary scale, and they needed monumental quantities of the metal to implement it. The Sumerian documents are extraordinarily specific about when and how this rescue operation began. 450,000 Earth years ago, 125 Shahs in their count. The first Anunnaki expedition landed in the Persian Gulf. The leader of this pioneering mission was Enki, the firstborn of Anu, ruler of Nibiru, but not the official heir due to complex succession rules. Enki was the chief scientist, a brilliant engineer, what we would today call a versatile genius. 50 Anunnaki established the first operational base on Earth. They called it Eridu, house built in a faraway home. The location was not accidental. The Persian Gulf was shallow, rich in dissolved minerals, and offered the possibility of extracting gold directly from seawater through chemical processes. It was the initial test, the pilot operation, but aquatic extraction proved painfully slow. The quantities were insufficient for Nibiru's monumental needs. Enki, applying his scientific genius, then initiated what the texts describe as a systematic search for the heart of the gold. Reconnaissance expeditions mapped the planet. Geological analyses were conducted, and then they found what they were looking for: the Abzu, the deep place, located in southeastern Africa, in the region that today corresponds to Zimbabwe and South Africa, where some of the oldest gold mines on the planet are found, with evidence of mining dating back to periods that conventional archaeology cannot adequately explain. The visitors had discovered gold deposits that surpassed their most optimistic projections. The operation scaled up rapidly. Hundreds of additional Anunnaki were transported from Nibiru. Complex operational hierarchies were created. Enki supervised the technical operations in the Abzu. His half-brother Enlil, the official heir, arrived later to assume overall command of the Earth mission, establishing his command base in Mesopotamia. Between them, a rivalry that would define Earth's destiny brewed silently. The workers in the mines were called the Igigi, those who observe and work. They were not exactly slaves as we understand the term, but rather lower-ranking Anunnaki, technicians and laborers who kept the extraction operations running continuously. The chronicles describe their working conditions in clear detail. Endless shifts in the dark depths of the Abzu, suffocating heat, constant danger of cave-ins. The work that would save Nibiru was literally killing those assigned to perform it. For 40 Shahs, 144,000 Earth years, the Igigi maintained their subterranean vigil. Tons of gold were extracted, processed, and sent to Nibiru. But the psychological and physical cost, was devastating. Beings capable of traveling between planets were reduced to miners covered in dust and sweat, forgotten in the bowels of an alien world. Then, inevitably, the tension exploded. The scriptures, particularly the Epic of Atrahasis, describe the moment with vivid detail. The Igigi could take no more. They burned their tools, abandoned the mines, and marched on Enlil's command center. It was not a simple labor strike. This escalated into a mutiny that could destroy the entire mission to save Nibiru. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance. And in this moment of total crisis, the most audacious and controversial solution of all emerged. The rebellion of the Igigi presented the Anunnaki leaders with an impossible equation. Without workers, there was no gold. Without gold, Nibiru would die. But forcing the rebels back into the mines would only postpone another insurrection, likely a more violent one. It was in this moment of absolute desperation that Enki proposed something that would change the cosmos forever. The Emergency Council of the Anunnaki convened under extreme tension. Enlil, the Supreme Commander, demanded exemplary punishment for the mutineers. His authority had been challenged, and this could not go unanswered. But even he recognized the harsh reality that the Igigi were right in their complaints. The work in the mines was degrading beyond what was bearable, even for beings genetically superior to terrestrial primates. Enki observed the situation with the eyes of a scientist, not a military commander. For a long time, he had been studying the native life on Earth, particularly a bipedal primate that roamed the African savannas near the mining operations, what we would call, millions of years later, Homo erectus. Strong, adapted to the climate, with opposable thumbs and the rudiments of teamwork, but it lacked the crucial component, enough intelligence to follow complex instructions and operate equipment. Enki's proposal to the council was brilliant, but also terrifying. Instead of importing more workers from Nibiru, he argued, let's manufacture them here. We can take the native creature, genetically enhance it with our own genetic material, and create a hybrid race intelligent enough to work, but not so intelligent as to question. The axiom analyzed the technical descriptions of the process in the Sumerian documents, particularly in the Epic of Atrahasis and the creation tablets. What emerges is a detailed protocol of genetic engineering, described in terms a civilization without microscopes could articulate. They speak of extracting the vital essence of a volunteer Anunnaki, a young god whose blood contained the Napishtu, that which carries the mark of life. Today we understand this as genetic code. They speak of mixing this essence with the clay of the Abzu, the base elements of the terrestrial creature. They mention vessels of purification, where the mixture was processed, which suggests sterile laboratory procedures. They describe failed attempts, deformed creatures, non-viable hybrids that died quickly or were born with grotesque defects. Ninhursag, the chief medical scientist of the Anunnaki, took technical command of the project. Her title, Lady Who Gives Form, was not just poetry, it was literal. For countless cycles, she and Enki refined the process. They adjusted genetic sequences, balanced chromosomes, and tried proportion after proportion of the mixture between terrestrial and extraterrestrial genetic material. The reports are brutally honest about the failures. Creatures that could not speak, others that could not move properly, some with intelligence but bodies too fragile for labor, others strong but unable to comprehend basic commands. Each failure was meticulously documented, each adjustment recorded. Far from being mysticism, this was documented empirical science, trial and error. Finally, after countless experiments, they succeeded. A viable fertilized egg containing the exact proportion of genetic material to create the perfect worker. But another problem arose: how to gestate these creatures. The females of Homo erectus could not carry the enhanced hybrid to term. Their wombs rejected the modified fetus, or they died in the process. The solution was extraordinary in its implication. 14 female Anunnaki, including Ninhursag herself, volunteered as surrogate mothers, goddesses as they would later be called, carrying in their wombs the first batch of the new species. The texts specify that 7 males and 7 females were born after 10 lunar months of gestation, a period different from both Anunnaki and primitive terrestrial gestation. These first hybrids were called the Adamu, the one of the earth. It was the technical designation of the model, like a serial number. Prototype 1 of the worker race, strong enough for hard labor in the mines, intelligent enough to use tools and follow protocols. But there was a crucial limitation deliberately inserted into their genetic code. They were sterile like mules, unable to reproduce. The axiom identified descriptions in the Sumerian chronicles that correspond very precisely to what we now know about genetic hybridization. The first generation of any radical hybrid is often sterile, but this was also by intentional design. Enlil had approved the project on one clear condition: absolute population control. Each new worker would be created in a laboratory, ensuring they would never outnumber their creators. The success was immediate. The Adamu were tireless workers, perfectly adapted to the terrestrial environment, capable of withstanding conditions that made the Igigi falter. The mines of the Abzu returned to full production. The crisis was resolved. Nibiru would continue to receive the vital gold for its survival. But Enki looked upon his creation with something more than professional satisfaction. He saw potential, a spark, something in the eyes of these new beings that transcended their original programming. The success of the Adamu project planted the seeds of a conflict that would reverberate throughout human history. In the laboratories of Eden, the first colony of hybrid workers thrived under constant observation. But in the corridors of the Anunnaki command, two brothers with radically opposing views on the future of these new beings began a dispute that would never be resolved. Enlil observed the Adamu with the coldness of an administrator calculating resources. To him, Enki's solution had been efficient, even admirable in its ingenuity. But they were tools, nothing more. Tools that breathed and bled, but tools nonetheless. His primary concern was to maintain absolute control over the population. Each new batch of workers was carefully monitored, sterilized, and accounted for. Enlil's nightmare was to wake up one day and discover that the creatures outnumbered their creators. Enki saw something completely different. In the eyes of the Adamu, he recognized not just programmed intelligence, but emerging consciousness. They developed language beyond basic commands. They formed complex social bonds. They demonstrated creativity and problem-solving. Some even showed signs of what could only be described as contemplation, looking up at the stars with the same perplexity their creators had once felt. The axiom identified in the Sumerian tablets a consistent pattern of systematic sabotage that Enki perpetrated against his brother's directives. Small, unauthorized modifications to the genetic code of new batches. Workers who demonstrated capabilities not specified in the original design. It was a genetic guerrilla war, fought on a microscopic scale within the nuclei of cells. The breaking point came when Enki made his most audacious decision. The scriptures describe the event through multiple metaphors, but the axiom managed to extract the consistent technical meaning. Enki secretly altered the genome of the Adamu in Eden, activating their reproductive capacity. The forbidden knowledge that Enlil so feared was simply biology, the ability to create life. The metaphor of the serpent in the texts has always been associated with Enki. His personal symbol was two intertwined serpents, spiraling upwards, an image that today we recognize as astonishingly similar to the double helix structure of genetic code. The serpent who offered the forbidden fruit was the geneticist offering reproductive autonomy. What happened was biological liberation, not a temptation to sin. When Enlil discovered the unauthorized modification, his reaction was immediate and harsh. The reports describe his reaction with visceral detail. Workers who could reproduce independently were no longer controllable tools. They were a species that could, in theory, compete with the Anunnaki themselves for planetary dominance. What we call the expulsion from Eden was, in practice, an emergency quarantine. Enlil ordered the immediate removal of all modified Adamu from the controlled facilities. They were banished to the wilderness, forced to survive on their own, without access to the visitors' technology or protection, left to die of hunger, thirst, or predators. The problem would solve itself, Enlil calculated, but Enki continued his clandestine intervention. He secretly taught the first groups of exiled humans techniques of agriculture, irrigation, and animal domestication. Knowledge that the documents describe as divine gifts was, in fact, an emergency survival program. transmitted by a creator who refused to abandon his creation. Humanity not only survived, but flourished. In a few generations, they spread across Mesopotamia, multiplying exponentially. They developed languages, cultures, and even the rudiments of their own technology. Enlil's worst nightmare was materializing before his very eyes. The Fraternal War continued, with the next round being the episode of the Tower of Babel. The axiom identified in the original texts, descriptions of humans trying to build what they called a Shem, a launch structure for Anunnaki flying vehicles. Contextual analysis reveals that Shem consistently referred to vehicles, not monuments. Humanity, under the veiled guidance of factions sympathetic to Enki, was trying to build aerospace technology, literally seeking to reach the heavens where their creators resided. Enlil could not tolerate such audacity, but a direct massacre would create political problems with other Anunnaki factions, some of whom were beginning to develop an affection for the small terrestrial hybrids. His solution was elegantly cruel: linguistic confusion. The chronicles describe an intervention that fragmented the unified human language into multiple, incompatible tongues. Without effective communication, the collaborative technological project collapsed. More importantly, humanity was permanently divided into groups that could not cooperate effectively against their creators. Every action by Enlil to control was met with a reaction from Enki to liberate. Every restriction imposed was secretly sabotaged. The brothers waged a genetic and cultural Cold War, with humanity as both the battlefield and the prize. And as this cosmic dispute unfolded, we, the objects of their discord, continued to evolve, learn and grow beyond any originally programmed parameters. Enlil's patience had limits, and humanity had surpassed them all. 13,000 years ago, as he observed from his command center the proliferating chaos of the hybrid species he never wished to create, the supreme commander of the Earth mission made the most drastic decision of his long existence. Humanity needed to be eradicated, completely. The Sumerian documents describe with administrative detail the complaints that led to this final resolution. The humans had multiplied beyond any projection. Their noisy cities disturbed the peace of the gods. They constantly warred among themselves, but also showed worrying signs of unified organization when challenged. Some groups were even developing technologies they should not possess, clearly aided by sympathizers among the visitors. For Enlil, the Adamu experiment had become a cancer that threatened the very mining mission itself. But how to eliminate an entire species spread across continents without leaving evidence of deliberate genocide? The answer came from the celestial cycles themselves, which the Anunnaki knew with absolute precision. The axiom, analyzing the astronomical position tables encoded in the tablets, confirmed that they could accurately predict cataclysmic events caused by gravitational disturbances. The next passage of Nibiru through the inner solar system would cause a specific planetary alignment, which would destabilize the Antarctic ice sheet. Millions of tons of ice would slide into the ocean simultaneously, generating tsunamis of unimaginable proportions. Waves kilometers high would sweep across all continents. Human civilization, concentrated in river valleys and coastal plains, would be obliterated in a matter of hours. Enlil presented his plan to the Anunnaki Council as a preventive evacuation, avoiding the word genocide. The operational bases would be temporarily abandoned. All personnel would be evacuated to orbital stations or lunar bases. After the cataclysm, they would return to resume operations with the human problem definitively solved. The Council approved unanimously, with one critical condition: a solemn oath of absolute secrecy. No human was to be warned. Enki was trapped. He had sworn the solemn oath along with everyone else. To break such an oath before the Council would mean not only dishonor, but possibly execution for treason. To watch in silence as his creation was annihilated destroyed him internally. But Anunnaki law was inflexible. It was then that the scientist found a loophole that would become legendary. The reports described the scene with almost comical detail in its legal specificity. Enki went to the dwelling of his most devoted human follower, Ziusudra, whom later texts would call Utnapishtim, or Noah. But instead of speaking directly to the man, Enki positioned himself outside and began speaking to the reed wall of the hut. "Wall, reed wall, listen to my words," he said. Tear down this house, build a boat, abandon possessions, save life, despise material goods and keep the soul alive. The instructions that followed were absurdly detailed. Exact dimensions of the vessel, waterproofing specifications using bitumen, internal compartments for different types of cargo, and ventilation systems. The structure described did not just float, it was a submarine designed to survive submerged under extreme pressure. Even more crucially, Enki instructed the wall on what to preserve. Besides pairs of animals for repopulation, there was something infinitely more valuable. Seeds of all cultivable plants, tools, and most importantly, tablets containing all vital knowledge, from mathematics and astronomy to the secrets of metallurgy. The cultural heritage of civilization was as important as the biological code. Ziusudra, listening through the thin wall, understood perfectly. His god was not technically violating the oath. After all, he had only spoken to the structure. If a human happened to overhear a conversation between a deity and building material, well, that did not constitute a breach of oath. When the waters came, they were exactly as the Anunnaki models had predicted. The scriptures describe the horror with an intensity that transcends millennia. Total darkness covered the land, winds exceeding any modern hurricane, waters rising inexorably, swallowing mountains. Even the Anunnaki themselves, watching from safe orbit, were terrified by the magnitude of the destruction. Some texts mention gods weeping, full of regret, especially the goddesses who had served as surrogate mothers for the first humans. For 7 days and 7 nights, the flood raged. When it finally receded, the earth was unrecognizable. Entire civilizations had been erased, millions of years of cultural evolution destroyed. But amidst the desolation, upon the peak of Mount Nisia, a vessel covered in pitch rested. Humanity, by a thread, had survived. When Enlil discovered the survival of Ziusudra and his family, his first reaction was murderous fury. He knew immediately who was responsible. But Enki, in a masterful move of celestial politics, argued that the survival of these few humans was in fact a blessing. With the Anunnaki infrastructure devastated by the flood, they would urgently need labor for reconstruction. These survivors, tested by the greatest imaginable calamity, had proven their worth. Reluctantly, Enlil agreed, but the rules would change drastically. The post-Diluvian world required a new architecture of control. Enlil finally understood that brute force and extermination attempts only strengthened human resilience. If they could not destroy us, they needed to rule us. But ruling billions of constantly proliferating creatures directly was logistically impossible. The solution was ingenious in its simplicity: rule by proxy. The Sumerian chronicles are explicit about this transition. They literally state that after the flood, kingship once again descended from heaven. It was the literal description of a new operating system. The Anunnaki would select specific bloodlines, hybrids with a higher percentage of extraterrestrial genetic code, and establish them as intermediaries between gods and men. The first post-Diluvian kings had blue blood because of literal genetics, not abstract nobility. Their reigns, according to the dynastic lists, lasted for centuries, not decades. Gradually, as the Anunnaki bloodline diluted over generations, the lengths of reign approached normal human lifespans. But the structure remained. Dynasties chosen by the gods, ruling in their name, collecting tributes that replaced direct labor in the mines. In parallel, they established what the axiom identifies as the most enduring control system ever created: organized religion. It was an administrative hierarchy disguised as transcendence. The priests were not inspired mystics. They were civil servants trained in carefully edited fragments of Anunnaki knowledge. They knew how to calculate eclipses, predict floods, and cure certain diseases, enough miracles to keep the masses in reverence, but never enough knowledge to question the established order. Every great ancient civilization followed this identical model. Egypt, with pharaohs who were literally considered living gods. China, with the mandate of heaven legitimizing dynasties. The Americas, with Mayan and Incan priest kings connecting heaven and earth. Even when the visitors physically withdrew, the system perpetuated itself autonomously, a perfectly programmed behavioral virus. But upon leaving, they left their fingerprints in stone, evidence that no academic reinterpretation can erase. Across the planet, structures that defy conventional explanation stand as silent witnesses to impossible technology. The Great Pyramid of Giza, with its 2,300,000 blocks positioned with perfect alignment, the axiom calculated that even working non-stop, placing one block every 2 minutes, day and night, it would take over 40 years just to position the stones, not counting quarrying, transport and finishing. The internal chambers, with their specific acoustic properties and precise astronomical alignments, suggest purposes that transcend burial. In Baalbek, Lebanon, 800-ton blocks were not only cut and transported, but lifted and positioned with a perfect fit. The largest modern mobile crane could barely move half that weight. In Pumapunku, Bolivia, we find blocks of diorite, one of the hardest known rocks, cut with a finish that only high-speed diamond tools or lasers could achieve. Surfaces polished to a mirror-like reflection, perfectly cylindrical holes, and mathematically exact angles. Tombs do not require laser precision, but technological infrastructures do. These were spaceports, communication stations, and processing centers. When the primary mission ended and the Anunnaki withdrew, these facilities were abandoned. Later civilizations, finding these colossal ruins, did what they could to imitate them, building primitive temples on impossible foundations, trying to capture a fraction of the power of their divine predecessors. But the most direct evidence lies not only in the past, but in the carefully calculated future. Every ancient culture preserved a specific prophecy about the return. It was a certainty based on astronomy, not a vague hope. The Sumerians were mathematically precise, stating that every 3,600 years, Nibiru returns. With Nibiru, its inhabitants return. The axiom has correlated astronomical data, historical records, and documented gravitational disturbances. The last significant passage coincides with cataclysmic events of the second millennium before the Common Era. The Exodus, the eruption of Santorini, the collapse of the Bronze Age. Adding 3,600 years brings us to a window between the 21st and 22nd centuries. The precursor signs that all prophecies describe are already manifesting. Global conflicts intensifying, extreme climate change, technology advancing exponentially, as if we are subconsciously driven to prepare. The very discovery and translation of the Sumerian documents in the last century and a half seems synchronized, as if it is time for us to remember. When they return, what will they find? A species that has finally decoded its own origin, that recognizes the literal divine blood running in its veins. Or warring fragments of a failed experiment, still worshipping distorted shadows of misunderstood memories. The answer is not written in the stars or in the ancient tablets. It is being written now, in every choice we make. To remain divided, or to recognize our common origin, to accept servitude, or to claim our hybrid heritage, to wait for saviors, or to become what we were unwittingly designed to be. Successors, the knowledge is decoded, the awakening inevitable. The only question is whether it will happen in time. If you like this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom Investigation project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.